without further ado, Mr. John Harden. You know what I'm saying?
Appreciate it. To him be the glory, brother.
All
It's
day.
not me, it's him. It's
All
him using me in any way. And I'm honored to participate with, Tim on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's all good.
All day, man. Yeah, the amazing thing is, the more, so when I was thinking about, I used to have a particular moniker, when I was from the gang. And then when I transitioned out of the gang, I got more and more familiar with, my first name again, which is Timothy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, come to find out, that Timothy means honoring God. And so that was kind of like my momentum and just taking one step at a time. I didn't necessarily know how I was going to do life on the other side of gangbanging, but I knew once I kind of discovered what my name meant, I just was asking God, like, help me to do that, every step of the way. I know at least as if I don't want to get religious, but I believe that's probably one of the better ways to try to build a relationship with you. And then, transitioning out here and kind of getting, more and more nifty with being creative and just kind of like stepping on social media platforms. And I, came across the handle, Timothy on purpose. It was more so, it is my first name, but like I used to honor the gang on purpose.
Okay.
I used to honor Deep Valley on purpose. I used to honor Oceanside on purpose in another way.
Sure.
And today, Timothy on purpose, I get to honor God on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Hence my name, honoring God and on purpose. So, yeah, man, I'm glad you can, partner with me today and just, Point of View podcast. Perspective is everything here. You've always been someone in my life that has helped me to keep things in perspective. I've hit you up at times when I just didn't know, like how to, I'm not going to say how to move forward, but like the best strategy to move forward with. And there were times where I didn't even plan on running into you, and you just happened to be right where God had you. Before we go into more of that, won't you do us a favor and just like, give us like some origin on you, like, like where you originate from, how you ended up here in Oceanside, or are you even here from Oceanside? Just tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I'm originally from Michigan, the great state of Michigan, I like to say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then it's a college town. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when my parents bought their house, it was predominantly African-American, urban area. And people go to Ann Arbor today, and, there's a very few families, they're still there that look like us. My father, my mom and dad are still there, and my sister lives in Ypsilanti. But I've always had that California bug to come out here. And I think it was watching a USC game, USC and Notre Dame, and USC was behind, and Notre Dame, actually SC came back, and Anthony Davis scored like 5 touchdowns, and I was like, man, that's where I want to go.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, that's where I want to go. So got out to California via Alabama, Birmingham, because I went to Birmingham after I got out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Went to UAB, got our ROTC scholarship, came out to California, and achieved my goal of coming to Cali, and just kind of lost it after that.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned names. My name, John, means God has been gracious.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing but truth to that, my brother, because I did all kind of stuff and did all kind of things backwards and that kind of thing. So got out to California, started working for the state of California back in '86 with the California Youth Authority.
Okay.
Did that as a...
Oh, man, so you was in CYA?
I was with CYA as an employee, not as a participant.
Okay. No, I was saying like in CYA as like I meant that, like a staff.
Yeah. I came in '86. It was a YC. Actually started working with the Central Juvenile Hall in '85, which was at that time the largest youth correctional facility under one roof in the United States.
Mm.
And so I started there, went to California Youth Authority in Whittier, Fred C. Nellis, and from there promoted to institutional parole agent and then field parole agent, worked a couple of offices out in the field. And it was kind of interesting, again, going back to my name. My senior year in college, I did a internship with the Department of Public Social Services, which is welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my roommate did one with the juvenile hall, And so he went back to Colorado, and I was still here in California, in Los Angeles. And his his administrator of his internship called and said, hey, asking for my roommate. And I was like, he's not here. He said, when is he coming back? I said, probably in the fall. He said, who's this? I said, who's this? And he's like, I'm his, administrator for his internship. He said, well, you like a job? I was like, doing what? He said, just watching kids sleep from 10 to 6 in the morning. I said, doing where? He said, yeah, in the juvenile hall. You just got to watch them sleep, make sure they're cool. He said, they pay you, at that time, $13.50 a month. I was like,
an hour?
$1,350.
Oh, 50 a month. Oh,
a month. I was like, a month to watch them sleep? I said, yeah, man, where I go? And so I went to Downey, which was where the hall was. I went down there, was doing that for about a year, and an older guy I worked with, his name was Mr. Garcia. He was like, schoolboy, you ever thought about going to the state? I was like, going to the state for what? He said, you can do the same thing in the daytime, make about $1,000 or more a month. That's all I needed to hear. Went down to the state, found out there's 2 positions, there's group supervisor.
This was in the 80s.
This was in the 80s. This was in the 80s.
That's a lot of money in the 80s.
Oh, I was making more money than my pops at the time. You know what I'm saying? When I got to the youth authority, when I became a youth counselor, because they said, well, if you got if you're a high school diploma for the group counselor, if you got at least 60 units of college credit, you can go for a youth counselor. No, just high school group counselor, group supervisor. And I said, man, I'm about to graduate. So I went with that one. And that's kind of how I just progressed from there. But it was solely by the grace and mercy of God. I mean, I wasn't coming out looking for no state.
Right.
Nothing.
Was you was you a field agent for CYA parolees?
Correct.
Got you.
I started out as a YC, got promoted in '88 to institutional parole agent, and then went to the field in '95.
How was that for you as an agent? Because I imagine, I mean, just from me knowing you seem like you have always had that. I'm not going to say always, right? Because I know there was a point where you probably didn't know how necessarily to counsel. You know what I'm saying? Like that's something, or you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's something that ultimately comes with, just aging and experience. But as a field agent, what was that like for you? Just having to be a parole agent, be a counsel, because that's what. We're not told this, it's like we have to learn it, you know what I'm saying, like in just the context of or individuals who experience parole or probation, that parole and probation officers are deemed as counselors.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And so what was that like for you?
Well, one thing I learned is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. You can have a lot of information, but wisdom is actually applying that information. And so growing up in an area, growing up in the time which I grew up in, my objective was not to look for ways to lock young people up again, but to actually share with them what I'd learned, because I'd learned stuff. I'd been through things. I remember, going to USC and not having enough money to pay tuition and not have enough to, for my food, and me and my roommate jumping the wall, which was really a criminal offense. So doing stuff that was outlandish, but I had a desire to survive, and I had a desire to complete what I started, and I wasn't going back home to Michigan without doing that. So just being able to share with them my life experiences, what I'd gone through, and the way to navigate that in a more legitimate way, but also understanding that there's a bigger picture. Because had I got caught up, then I wouldn't have qualified for no state job. You know what I'm saying? So looking at not just where I'm at, but where do I ultimately want to be, and what do I have to do today to navigate to that position. And so it was just a lot of times just being honest, being transparent, letting them know, hey man, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect either, but you ain't got to be perfect to be socially be acceptable. You feel what I'm saying? And so sometimes we think, well, it's this person, it's that person. No, what are you trying to do? Because if you always looking at somebody else being the problem or the cause of your issues without first looking at yourself, you're going to always have a problem.
Especially when you're in a position to help somebody.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? What was something that, just looking back on that period of time, that impacted you as far as something that was transferred from, one of your clients? Indirectly or directly, like, whether it was like, I'll just give you an example. So for instance, I was on parole from my last parole situation was from 17. I got off in 18. They told me I wasn't supposed to get off in 18.
Okay.
That's what my parole officer told me in the beginning. But, because of my caseload. But I did what I was supposed to do. And where he started off pretty aggressive with me and pretty just I'm zero tolerance, no nonsense. He went from, visiting me like every week, to like me only having to come see him once a month, to like him just calling. And then there was a point where he told me, man, I ain't got to worry about you. You know what I'm saying? Like, then it hit me like he had a whole bunch of caseloads. Obviously, for some reason, there's a period of time where I don't realize that. I'm just like, he always owned me, or it's just me. But nah, he really would like for someone like me to just do what I got to do, so he ain't got to put all of that, energy into me. At the end of my parole, like, he, not only did he congratulate me because I got off in a year, which is something that he didn't do, but he apologized. You know what I'm saying? He was like, man, I wasn't trying to judge you or nothing. It's just looking at your caseload.
Sure.
And then, usually with your kind of caseload, you don't get off in a year. You got to at least do 2 years. But things were changing at that time too. But he just, he apologized to me. And for me, I've never had a, law enforcement or an agent of any kind like apologize to me. You know what I'm saying? And so I know that was big for him because he was a hard dude. So for me, that's something that I believe indirectly I impacted something for him to have apologized. Not obviously a similar situation, but that's kind of like an example, like something
Sure.
that might have put you in a position to communicate with one of your clients in a way or one of your parolees in a way where you didn't necessarily set out to.
Well, I think my style of being an agent was was actually directly impact on how I grew up. Mm-hmm. I remember being a quote-unquote peace officer when I first got to the department, and I was living in Los Angeles at the time, came off the 10 freeway, finna go to my house, got pulled over by a CHP, and he said he stopped me for speeding, and I said, okay. He said, you mind if I search your car? I was like, you said you stopped me from speeding, what you need to search my car for? He was like, well, the license and registration, please. So I gave him my license and registration, and he proceeded to run my license. At that time, it said, I had confidential plates, so it said Property California Youth Authority, so I know he knew that. And he proceeded to have me set out on the curb for about close to 45 minutes to an hour. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so I was like, okay, I see where this is going. But it also made me say that based on my caseload, and at that time I was married, and my mother-in-law lived in what's called, South Central. It was a more likelihood I was going to see those guys that I supervised in the hood, in the neighborhood I was in, mm-hmm. more so than somebody who lived out in Simi Valley.
Got you.
So my thing was to make an actual impact because I'm going to see you again. And you chances are you're going to see me or you're going to see somebody in my family. So my whole approach was more about helping them understanding the opportunity and the resources available and making use of those resources. And to your point, there are certain levels of parole supervision that are just built into the system. When you come out, reentry parole, you're talking to somebody once a week. You know what I'm saying? And as you continue to establish some familiarity and some comfort and some adjustment and coming back out, those systems are designed to kind of lessen that contact with your agent unless you do something that maintains that level of supervision. So that's kind of built into the system. So what I used to tell guys when they came out and I had a file in front of me, I say, this is your file. This is the picture that's been painted to this point. Now I can read the file and make my decision based on what the file say, or you can show me something different. Because everybody say, well, man, that wasn't me, that wasn't, that's how I'm changed. Okay, well, I hear you. So I'm not even going to go into all that. I just want you to show me who you really are. If this is what you're saying is not the real narrative. Mm-hmm. And I would give them that situation. But I also let them know I got a job to do. You held accountable to your conditions of parole. And this is the way it really is. And so I'm not off you, but I'm expecting you to, take responsibility for who you are. And kind of going back to that, they called me when I was inside the facility Hard Rock. So I was one of them kind of guys that was on you too. But I also knew that it was easier to adjust my way of dealing with you than it was to try to get hard after being, you know, a little bit more lenient too.
Right.
So that also has a lot to it, establishing that foundation.
What was one of your main encouragements, you know, to your parolees? Was it based off of caseload, or was it based off, you know, some people have like a set way of just wanting to encourage or empower, you know, not, and this isn't even necessarily, you know, like a parole agent, like geared to parole agents, you know what I'm saying? Because I know not every parole agent wants to encourage, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But just given, like you said, you coming from a particular environment, you knowing that you most likely were going to see certain individuals again, what was something that you know, would leverage as far as encouragement to try to help them, like psychologically, mentality-wise?
Well, again, just going back to establishing some form of identity within themselves and not allowing other people to define them. You know, we talk about names, and even from a biblical perspective, names are very important. And a lot of people don't know, even though you might not have been the Timothy that the Bible says, and I wasn't the John that the Bible said, you know what I'm saying? But over my life, it was prophetic that I got that name, you know what I'm saying? And so I would just try to teach people or share with people, man, the importance of, you know, the thought process, who you are. You are here for a purpose. And don't ever think it was just by random. And even when you said earlier in the introduction, you know, I just kind of seemed to show up. No, well, it wasn't. That was divinely
Right, no
intervention,
yeah.
bro. I was meant to be there, you know.
100%.
And he had a reason for me being there. And this
and
is
it happened more. It happened more than you could. It's deep. I'm sorry to cut you off,
No.
but it's deep how often it happened, and actually what was taking place inside of me concerning despair. Like there were several times where I was in a moment of, you know, despair. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's different. It was different every time, and it's different as I grow. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
but as a man, especially like as a man who has come through and from what you come from, I couldn't help all the more but just thank, you know what I'm saying, God for what he like, you know, he knows us in and out, through
Yes,
and
he
through.
do.
So he knew even more than what your words can do, spiritually, you were on purpose. You know what
Yes.
I'm saying? Like you were right on point. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and again, I credit that to him, and me coming to a point in my own life where I was willing enough or humble enough to allow him to use me in whatever way, and that has been my cry or my focus for close to, I don't know, 20 years now. Just use me in the way you can, because and I kind of regress. I know came to California, got married, got divorced, and there was a part of crisis, you know, and I was trying to save my marriage, because we've been together for like 20-some years. We, you know, dated for 2, and then we're married for, like I said, about 18 years, close to 20. And went through these different things to try to save my marriage. And the Spirit of God just said, man, instead of trying to say, and he didn't say man, but
Yeah.
instead of trying to focus on saving your marriage, why don't you work on being a better person?
Mm-hmm.
And that dawned on me, like, wow, there is a difference, because you can still be a creep and save your marriage and not be a better person.
Right.
And so just striving to be a better person, understanding I've been through a lot, and there's a reason why I've been through, and it's not about me, it's a bigger picture about what I can share or what I can show people in terms of his graciousness and being willing to do that. So whenever he puts those kinds of situations in I cross path with people that might be in need, and also I'll tell people this, I get blessed, you know what I'm saying, by their interactions, their exposures, their experiences. You know, it's not just a one-way street, because I know, and it reminds me of what he's brought me through.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only so many years prior to maybe what we've gone through together that I was in those positions, and somebody came through for me.
So, other than being an agent, was there any other profession or career, or did you step into anything else?
Man, I tell people I've got many channels but one source. You know, I've worked for the state. I got securities license in terms of the financial services industry back in 1999. I still keep my licenses and insurance and different things active because I used to work for the state. Like I said, I remember back in I think it was '92 that the state didn't have a budget, and so for 60 days or 2 months we got IOUs. So I didn't really get a paycheck, but the people in Congress up in Sacramento was getting checks, and they was debating whether they should sign the budget at the expense of all the state workers. And I remember back in the day, Security Pacific was the bank that honored the IOUs, and so getting my check and taking it to Security Pacific. Was it Pacific? Yeah,
It's Pacific.
Yeah, they don't exist no more anyway, so they can't be mad. But taking it to them and having them honor it so I could pay my mortgage and pay my car payment made me think, hey man, even though this state job's supposed to be a solid job, I need to always have me something to own that I have more of a say-so about it. And that's what kind of got me into the entrepreneurial thing of, getting licensed and being, in the position where I could do something on the side, even though I might work a job, part-time or whatever. That freedom and ability to do things outside of somebody else saying, okay, this is all what you can do, or this is all you can work, you only work, has helped me a lot. Mm-hmm. So, done that. I mean, I've always had that kind of bug. I worked for the state. I've worked for Winco Foods. I do what I do. You know what I'm saying? But it just kind of helps me be around people, and there's usually a reason for it.
How often did you actually run into individuals that were either on your caseload or you seen in CYA?
Not so much because I came down and they moved me. When I first came out to the field, I went from Nellis to Westminster in Orange County. So that was in '95. Then I went from there to Covina Parole. For Covina, I went to got down to Oceanside. No, San Diego in '97. So I remember in LA, down there, I think we just came back from visiting my mother-in-law, and I was at the gas station off of, I think it was Exposition or somewhere in there, maybe a Western. And somebody called me by a name that would have been only known in the correctional facility. And that's when I saw, dude, wow. And so I met the guy halfway in the parking lot because I had my family with me, and I didn't want him all up on my car, So I met him halfway, man. He told me, hey, man, how you doing, that kind of thing. He said he just got out of YTS at the time, and he was, doing better. He was back in the neighborhood. He just said, hey, man, we always didn't get along, but you was always fair and consistent. He said there was some jokers, man, I just blew them away if I'd have saw him. He said, and I just, like I said, it rung true to me because here I am visiting in-laws, and I'm at the gas station finna go back. I was living in Fontana.
And he see you before
and he see me before I see him. You dig what I'm saying? So that's I knew that was godly wisdom in terms of just treating people. Kind of, they say the golden rule, but I mean godly wisdom. Just treat people like you want to be treated. In fact, Christ said, he raised it up a notch. He said, love your neighbor as I have loved you, which, sometimes we don't love each other. We don't love ourselves. So therefore, just doing it like you would love yourself is not it. You got to do it like he loves you.
Yeah.
And that takes it to another level.
What did you see in the 80s and the 90s, from your perspective as a black man, in LA and in San Diego, just from your vantage point and from who you were as a person and who you were becoming, what could you see and say the issues were that kept individuals such as myself just stuck?
And that's pretty deep. I think when I came to San Diego, and actually Los Angeles too, is you know, if you're familiar with LA, it's kind of racially divided. Mm-hmm. And I remember, and I'm not, of course, preaching, division and things of that nature, but I know that a lot of times people of color have these beefs against each other when they don't really know the history. When you know your history, whether you're from, a different country or different continent, you have actually more similarities than you do have differences. And I think we have been pitted against each other a lot of times for the same little space because we don't know that there's a bigger picture or reason for certain things that take place. And so just seeing a lot of people do things and make decisions not based on actual knowledge or history, but just based on maybe, I'll say for lack of a word, tradition. This is what we've always done. We've always had beef with so-and-so. We've always had conflict with so-and-so. But why? You know what I'm saying? The reason for that may have been a misunderstanding or it might have been dealt with years ago. So why are we still perpetuating that? Mm-hmm. And I think some people, I like to say, don't ask those secondary questions. It's one thing to ask the question why, but then they say ask that why question 5 levels deep to get to the real root.
Right.
And
not the surface stuff.
Not the surface stuff. And that's where that happens. Like I said, when I'm, people say, well, man, you from Michigan, you from, up north, quote unquote. Both my parents from the South. And I remember going back and looking at a situation when my father, was working for Ford, making good money at the time. And he wanted to move originally to the north side of Ann Arbor. And they just kept prolonging the financing and things of that nature. And he got frustrated, and there was always one obstacle after another. And then they said, well, John, have you ever thought about a house on the west side? He's like, no, what's on the west side? So he went down there, and of course, it's all of us. You know what I'm saying? And he said, okay, because he just wanted the house. And his loan was approved in like 2 days. Mm. And I said, Pops, you was redlined, man.
Wow.
They didn't want you over there. You know what I'm saying? This was 1961. They didn't want you over there. But they didn't say that. You know what I'm saying? And so...
And it was an agent that asked him, hey, have you ever considered...
It was the same real estate agent he was working with on the north side that was showing him houses up there. Put his bid in, put his application in for the loan, and it's taken 4 or 5 months, And it's like, oh, well, hey, we got to get your check stubs again, or we got to get this. You know what I'm saying? And then they said, well, have you ever thought about something on the west side? Because my pops was getting frustrated. He's like, well, nah. And so he took him over there, showed him a little house all leaned over, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, let's do it. And boom, 2 days later, boom, he got it. You know what I'm saying? That's the house they still live in today. Mm-hmm. Of course, they've done upgrades and stuff. Right. And that's the house I grew up in. So... And now the neighborhood is completely changed again, too. You know what I'm saying? So I think...
Changed as far as like gentrification?
Oh, man. There's a neighborhood. There was a family that lived on the corner, and then our house was in the middle. And we used to play football in a space that was owned by that house in the front. Because his name was Smith, he had a garden, just like my mom had a garden in the back of our house. And we used to play football. They built another house there. They sold the property, sold that little part of the acre, and they built a house there now. Mm-hmm. So the neighborhood has completely changed. Like I said, my parents, and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 other families that are part of that original group of people. But it had transitioned before, because in the 40s and 50s, it was a different group of people that lived there. And it became African American predominantly in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Mm-hmm. Then it's kind of changed again. So,
what was it like growing up, under... You got brothers and sisters?
I've got 1 younger sister. She's 3 younger sister, and 3 years younger than me.
What was it like growing up under your parents?
It was different. My pops was, were strict, kind of strict. I mean, not strict, just wasn't for no foolishness. But he only put his hands on me like 3 times in my entire life. Seems like my mom, she was there every day. She was always hitting on me. But she did it out of love. She just kind of thing like that. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't until, again, going back to history, going back and learning their history. Both my parents lost their moms when they were, I think my pops was like 6, my mom was 7. So normally the mother's the nurturer. Well, my parents didn't have that nurturing. So we didn't start saying we love you to each other, man, until I was like, 40. You dig what I'm saying? But we made a conscious effort to change some of that stuff. But I remember going home to Michigan and just staying there for like a whole month. And again, going back to the luxury of entrepreneurship and not have to depend on my job. took leave from my job and just, did what I had to do and had residual income coming. So I was able to stay there for a whole month. And just sitting there and listening to my mom talk, listening to my dad talk, and getting the history of how they were brought up and how they were raised made me say, they can't give you something they didn't have, bro. They can't do that. And I never had no issue with them. I just grew up in that generation. It just was the way it was. So I never looked back and say it was their fault, but it was just different. And but I did see some of those own traits in me in terms of the responsibility and how I responded to some of my kids. I mean, I got 5 kids. Oh, their mother and I have 5 kids. You know what I'm saying? So I wasn't always approachable too. You know what I'm saying? It was hard rock at YA. It was hard rock at the house. You know what I'm saying? And my mom, one time she came out, she was like, "Johnny, what are you doing to these kids?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
She said, "What are you doing to these kids?"
Hey, I come home from work and the garage door went up. She was in the living room playing with them. And they all shot upstairs and got to running around doing stuff.
Oh, when the garage door
When the garage door came up, she was like, "What's going on? What are you doing to these kids?" I was like, "What you mean? What you talking about, Mom?" And she said, "Well, we were all playing around, having fun, and all of a sudden the garage door went up and they just took off." I said, "Well, they probably know they had some stuff to do that they hadn't done yet." So, "Well, you can't do that." I said, "Well, you did it to me." You know what I'm saying? But it was a different scenario, you know what I'm saying? So she looking back,
and it's deep too, because, sorry to cut you off, it's one of you and your little sister, but it's 5 of them. So that energy just, all of them, all of your kids in the energy of just, grandma and the kids and just having fun, and then it just cuts off, and it's just the tension of, we got to get this done. It's different than if it was 2. Right, you know what I'm saying?
Really, it ain't. It's
again, a slight difference. You know what I'm saying? But
I hear what you're saying. Like it was just 2 of us, but then my mother's younger brother, which is my uncle, lived right around the corner. So I had like 7 or 6 cousins, and 3 of those were older than me. So I had kind of like pseudo older brothers. You know what I'm saying? So we were all like, and I always thought that was kind of like, how did that happen? Y'all both leave Arkadelphia and come and buy houses around the corner from each other. You know what I'm saying? But that was just one of those kinds of things. So I was raised like that, but it was just 2 of us in the house.
Gotcha.
But my thing was just not having the compassion or the empathy or the, even just the sensibility to say, "Hey, man, they're kids." You can't expect kids to adhere to adult rules and regulations.
I'm learning that right now.
Of course, we all have to learn that, though. You know what I'm saying? And so I was putting my expectations, adult expectations, on my kids, and I got great kids. They're great adults today because of some of the things they learned in terms of their independence and being able to do things on their own. But then sometimes I look back and say, man, there were some decisions that I made that were probably more corporal minded than correctional, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? I could have done it a little differently. But your parenting skills, like you say, nobody gets a manual on how to raise kids or how to do things like that. One of my oldest son, he went through some challenges in his life, and I'm a parole agent, and you doing some stuff opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing, and then I got your brothers and sisters in this house, and so we kind of had some friction. And it was a time where he has 2 sons, and he was like, "Man, I appreciate you," because I didn't see all that till I had my own kids. You know what I'm saying? And it was the same thing with me and my father. My father and I really weren't close when I lived there, but once I started having kids on my own. Man, he was my rock. I had to call him, "Hey, Pops, how'd you do this?" And you had, it was 2 of us. I got 5.
Right.
And it's 2 of him. He's like, "How'd you do it? You got 5. I mean, come on." You know what I'm saying? And it's just one of those things when you don't allow it to all be you, recognizing that it's okay to, I mean, I had to learn this too. It's okay for my kids to see me in a vulnerable, transparent position. It was a long time, man, for they to see me cry. I remember my son putting his hand on my face like, "Them real tears, you crying?" Because he had never.
How old was he?
My youngest boy was probably about 11. And I was reading
Never seen you cry. Probably didn't even think it was a thing that could possibly ever happen.
Hey, I didn't know it was supposed to happen, you know what I'm saying? Because I bottled a lot. my whole thing, Timothy, talking about coming from Michigan, going to Alabama. I was 17 when I left high school. When high school was over, I graduated at 17. So I'm in Birmingham, Alabama by myself. As a 17-year-old. You know what I'm saying? And I got what I got from scholarship, came to California in 18. I'm in California, you know, on my own. You feel me? My parents are back in Michigan. That's 3,000 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had one relative at the time. She was like an older lady, you know what I'm saying? But I'm pretty much out here on my own. So I had to learn to kind of maneuver this thing. And it wasn't about the emotionalness of it, or being emotional, or allowing other people to know, hey, man, he ain't from here. I'm going to always look like I'm fit in. You don't know what to think. You know what I'm saying? So it was that kind of thing. I don't know if that answered your question completely, but
yeah, it did. I mean, because ultimately, I asked that question because, we are who we are everywhere we go, right? We take, everything that helped us or hurt us into what we do. And so I was going to ask you, how much of how you were brought up and what was, instilled in you, did you take into and did you have to leave out of, your career as, someone who, dealt with, parolees or inmates? You know what I'm saying? Like seeing other kids, especially YA, man, like you being in YA, I know that's you can't even, like gladiator school isn't even really it's an understatement, you know what I'm saying, especially in the 80s and the 90s, you know what I'm saying, like it was very tumultuous for any individual going into that situation for however much time, but to be someone who was, you had supervision over someone else's, child, it always interested me why some of the men that chose to act in such a negative way towards a lot of us, what they went through, versus the individuals who, did approach us in a very, whether it was spiritual or whether it was just like great-hearted, you know what I'm saying? It was, you can see it was definitely, they contrasted one another. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask you that, like, how much of, what made you who you were as a result of your parents did you take into that opportunity?
Yeah, well, going back to what I was saying earlier, that, Christ said, love your neighbor as you have loved yourself. And then he later changed that to love your neighbor as I have loved you. And there are a lot of people, based on their experiences and their past, that they don't really love themselves. And so that's projected out on other people. There's a saying that hurting people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And so learning the things I learned, because my childhood, even though at the time I didn't really understand the dynamics of it, so per se, I'm grateful for it. Now, I'm not grateful for the way I necessarily processed it and the effects it may have had on other people in my life, because I was emotionally disconnected because of some stuff. But I learned that those were learned behaviors that I could learn. You follow me? In fact, just kind of give you a sidebar, mm-hmm. I remember my son going through a challenge and his life. I was like, man, he's 18, he's on his own, boom, I'm through. And I'm a Christian, you know what I'm saying? I'm at a Bible study with some brothers. And this brother, man, who's real close to me to this day, he lives in Houston today. And he just called me out. I had it was about 4 or 5, actually probably about 12 of us. And it was just like everybody was high-fiving, yeah, man, bro, boy got to grow up, whoop-de-whoop. And he's like, man, that's some punk stuff. I don't want to cuss, but it's some punk, yeah, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, what? He's like, man, he said, what would you do if God did that to you?
Mm. Them be the questions right there.
Dude.
Them be the ones.
Tim, I called all 5 of my kids and apologized to all of them. And 5 different individuals grew up in the same house, processed that differently. They didn't know what to do. Me and their mom was split up at the time. And they were like, wow, Dad apologized. And they're like, some people cried, some people didn't know it. But my son was like, man, you know, I don't know what to do. But then he finally said, hey, man, I want to have a relationship with my dad. And that's how we became, you know, kind of reconcile our situation.
Mm-hmm.
But then going back, turns out when he was a young kid, he was about 5, he was emulating me, you know, watching me get dressed and, you know, got his little suit on and that kind. And he said, hey, Dad, look, I'm just like you. And I was like, man, don't be me, be yourself. And he took that as I didn't want him being like me.
Mm-hmm. In a negative way?
In a negative way. And that's kind of, he went to the gangs, you know, and all the kind of, plus he had uncles that was, you know, down in L.A. with the stuff. And, you know what I'm saying? So he thought, well, if I can't be like my father, my pops, who can I be like?
The next closest.
You feel what I'm saying? And I didn't learn that to him and his mom was already, you know, separated. He was in the car with me. He was in the car with us, and she got out the car, and kudos to her. She said, hey, your son got something to tell you. He want to tell you, because he'd already confided in her. And he got out the car. She got out the car, and I'm like, hey, what's up? He told me. I was like, man, that ain't what I meant. He was like 18 at that time.
Well, that's what I was about to ask. What was the difference?
13 years he dealt with that, bro. I'm like, no, man, that ain't what I meant.
And that's, man, it's crazy, man. I got them like, that's like, it could, like some people think it's sometimes it's more than one thing, you know, or some people don't necessarily know what the ACE is, which, you know, is, you know, we come to learn in the work that I do with some of the youth. Some of the training is an adverse childhood experience. And there's like like 10 questions that you're asked, and, you know, in most cases, for a lot of us that grew up in a particular, you know, area or go through a specific experience within the home, half of those are going to be answered yes. But, you know, a lot of, all of our kids pretty much, it'd be like they 10 across the board. But it don't even take 10. You know what I'm saying? It literally, and that's the misconception, I think, with some of these individuals who diagnose or who judge these kids or even, you know, adults. Is like, if it's 5 and below, if it's 5 or more, we can kind of justify it. If it's between 1 and 5, they had enough common sense to make the right decision. And the reality is, when it's something that's powerful, that's like one of the most powerful decisions that a young man and a grown man can make within a moment like that is, you know, your son deciding to take it as a negative and you deciding to walk away from it, expecting him to take it as a positive.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And then 13 years later, there's gang banging, there's more other traumas. And then, but by the grace of God, there is the confiding.
Sure.
And actually coming to a point to where it's like, this is what I meant, and you can actually like rectify it. You know.
And going back to what I said earlier, he was like 5 years old, and so I'm a grown man, and I'm telling this 5-year-old, don't be like me, and he's processing that through a 5-year-old's mind. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so he's like, well, you know, don't be like you. What's up? You know what I'm saying? And so that was on me in terms of explaining that in a language or a way that he could understand that too. You know what I'm saying? I just kind of expect you to get it because that's the way I'm saying it.
Right.
And I walked away and went on to work. You know what I'm saying? And plus, he grew up in an environment, all my kids grew up in an environment where that was something that you didn't have to be a part of unless you chose to. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Even when he made that decision, he had to go out of his way. It wasn't like that's the neighborhood we lived in.
Right.
You got to go out of your way.
Physically and mentally.
Physically and mentally, you know what I'm saying? And again, all my kids, I mean, not to, you know, downplay, I mean, but they educated and woo-de-woo, and so you starting to act this certain way. And so that's like, that really was puzzling me. But then it goes back to what we talked about earlier, that identification aspect. Okay, well, here's who I'm with. I feel comfortable and I'm embraced here. You know what I'm saying? Not to say he don't like me, but we don't get along kind of thing because we on two different value systems, you know what I'm saying? And so it was just kind of that kind of thing. But I think as a parent, not bringing it, you know, putting it in that vernacular of a 5-year-old was a mistake that I know I made. And I think that's kind of also has an impact. Well, I know it does. Because And I give kudos to his mother, because she talked to him and he said, hey, he obviously explained that to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got together, and then, from him to say it and say what he said and have a chance to explain it. He said it, hey man, I didn't take it that way. I know what you're saying, but that ain't how I took it. And then he had other people who was willing to say, hey, well, come on, wrong with us then. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
How did were you able to incorporate, what was the like the spiritual component to in what you received growing up and what you were able to transfer going into your own fatherhood experience?
Well, I grew up in the church. My father's, and I don't know if he still is, I think he is, but still chairman of the deacon board in the church I grew up. And so that was always around me. But then I tell people there's a difference between religion and relationship. I was religious. I knew I was exposed to it, but I still was doing my dirt, especially as a kid. And then as an adult, I learned about the importance of relationship. And so I always sought out what I knew to be a better way. Even when I'll say it like this, I was convicted by the Spirit when I wasn't doing right. I knew it wasn't no way I could just say, man, I'm cool with this. Because there was always those seeds that had been planted in me in my childhood to know, hey, man, you ain't supposed to be doing this. You ain't supposed to be over here. You know what I'm saying? And so it was a conscious decision. So now go back to what your question is. I mean, it was a part of who I am. I can't separate the two now because it has become a part of who I am. There was a period of time where it was almost like a Jekyll Hyde thing. I lived two lives. I'm doing this on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday I'm doing this. Well, that's hypocrisy. And so being real to who he's called me to be, being real to him, I got to make some decisions. And he's saying walk by faith, not by sight. So now I got to live this word, not just recite it and say it and read it. It's got to be me. And that's why I kind of go back to that impact of don't just try to say your marriage, work on being a better person. Because I could have easily have probably manipulated the situation like I had manipulated so many times prior and saved the marriage, at least temporarily, but that wouldn't have been a real marriage, you feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where me being away and having a chance to be introspective and looking at me and looking at my impact not only on myself but on others has allowed me to grow. But with that growth allows me, I've been also given the opportunity to give. That makes sense.
Makes sense. I want to ask you, at what point did you realize, reading this Bible as much as I possibly can is going to be, it's going to be my car. It's going to be, my income. It's going to be, spiritually, metaphorically speaking, it's going to be, the best relationship, counselor I could possibly have. You know what I'm saying? At what point did you realize that the word was, as a man,
Sure.
the word was going to be your number one source of of counseling and just everything?
Well, I think for me, right around the time I through my divorce and separation and things of that nature, there was a lot of different ways that could have gone. I had done some things, of course, I shouldn't have done. And initially, the impact of that was more pride responded than, a real honest, okay, I blew it. You put up with me as long as you could. Kudos to you kind of thing. It was just like, how can you make me look this way? You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. Because so much of who I was, or I thought I was based on who others thought I was. Not so much who I really was, just their image, whether it was a deacon in the church or happily married couple or father of 5 children, whatever. And so just getting the revelation, Jesus said when he was in a temptation in Matthew, he said, man should not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out the mouth of God. And then I looked at that, and in the 2 Timothy that talks about that all scripture is inspired by God and is profitable for what? Teaching, for reproof, correction, so the man of God may be equipped and profitable and thoroughly equipped for every good work. And so the marriage and myriad of those two made me say, okay, anything and everything I need starts here. And so, not to say I don't read other books or
right.
not I'm saying I'm not exposed to other stuff, but I filter it through the Word. Mm-hmm. I've learned to do that, and that's an evolution. It's not, it's not a progression. It's not something that I just start doing and I stick with. No, I had my ups and downs. I've had my challenges. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause, I know people who have gone through certain things and, they become quote unquote suicidal. Mm-hmm. Where I was more homicidal. You dig what I'm saying? Yeah. Looking at, okay, who can get hurt behind this? Because I got legal firearms in my house, you know what I'm saying, different little stuff. Yeah. But it's like, nah, man, that ain't how I want you to operate. You got to deal with this. I'm not saying take the emotion out of it, but don't base it on the emotion. Right. Who have I made you to be? What have I? And going back to what my boy DT said, man, what would you do if God did you that way? Mm-hmm. And so from that, a lot of stuff is able to come out. But to answer your question, I think that's where the actual dependency, because I had a situation actually one time, and this is also kind of powerful that even though I was grown, I was doing good, there were periods of time where, I'd make some silly financial mistakes and, we call Pops and see what's up. Hey, man, could you shoot me X number of dollars? And I think when he was about 55, he retired. He was like, hey, I love you, son. He said, but what would you do if I wasn't here? Who would you call in? And I was like, man, he said, I'm on a fixed income. I can't keep shooting you a couple thousand here, because you done made some mistakes. Right. He said, you got to do something different. And my jaws got tight. But I learned to trust God more so than even my earthly father in situations like that. And that's kind of also, and that was around that same time that, the marriage and relationship, all that kind of stuff was going together, going, down in that way. So that's where it really kind of came off. But just kind of understanding that he's true, he's faithful. And the Word of God teaches us the character of God. You can't separate God from his Word, and his character is in there. And so when you can understand that, and you don't just have, like we talked about earlier, a surface understanding or a surface knowledge, you actually have a revelation of that. Mm-hmm. It has an impact on you that will carry you for forever.
What was your biggest, if you don't mind, what was your biggest cry out to God for help for? In the period of you transitioning through divorce and just entertaining the idea of living a life outside of a 20-year marriage?
Selfishness, pride, challenge with sexual morality. You know what I'm saying? I'm a single guy now. I've had situations where I've had, been tempted relationships with women in the church. Like, come on, bro. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? How you gonna pull this off? You know what I'm saying? And I in my mind it's like, man, God, well, you made her beautiful. Come on, now you don't want me to appreciate? Like he said, no, I like that. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Honor her as my daughter. That's what I want. You know what I'm saying? And so what it's also caused me to say is be honest with myself and say, I'm not looking at this the same way you looking at it, so I'm gonna have to step back. You know what I'm saying? That's why, and it's been a blessing too, That's why I tend to have, many groups, because I don't want that challenge, that temptation, because that impacted my marriage and fidelity. You know what I'm saying? Even once I was outside the marriage, I would go into situations where I'd be cool for a little while, then let me go ahead and have this relationship, even though I'm not married. I'm doing these things, you know what I'm saying? I know what the books say, but I'm still challenged with that. And so that's probably been, but it's all been based on, like I said, selfishness and pride. Not necessarily caring about this person, but being willing to use that person for my own issues.
On a deeper level, just mentioning those things, because I think a lot of us can we can feel like, oh, okay, thank you, Lord, you got me through this moment of selfishness, or thank you, Lord, you got me through this season of pride. But deeper, than what we experience, in those seasons, like what are some of the things that you learned about how like pride and selfishness are things that are going to like continue, just like grace and mercy follow us all the days of our life.
Sure.
Like pride and selfishness are going to follow us all the days of our lives. Like that and its connection to our flesh. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and I think you said something very important there. The connection to the flesh. That's where it stems. And most people, Christians in particular, don't understand that it's that separation from the flesh. One of the revelations God gave me maybe about, I'd like to say maybe 5 months ago, was a meditation on Galatians 2:20. And it says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer he who lives, but Christ who lives in me. A life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Well, I got a revelation that, okay, it's no longer I who live, so I've been crucified with him. That's that flesh. And then he had me, the Holy Spirit had me add, it's no longer I, is what it said. I live in the flesh. In the life I now live in the flesh, he said, free from all non-God honoring behaviors and challenges.
What version is that?
Well, see, that's the version he gave me. That's the
I got you.
version he added
That's
to
what
that.
He downloaded to you.
He downloaded to me. I'm living in this flesh, but I got to be free from these non-God honoring behaviors and attitudes. You know what I'm saying?
I was like, what amplified version is that?
He said, but I live in faith in God, an uncompromising faith in his son. See, so my faith in God, in Jesus, has to be uncompromising. But I also have to understand that I'm in the flesh, but my flesh has not been given permission to participate in these things. Because, see, the real us is spirits. We live in the flesh. We live in a body. But we often give the body the true identity, when that's not how it's biblically set out. And the lead.
Yeah.
And just like anything else, you've heard this, I'm sure. If you've got 2 dogs, the one you feed the most is going to grow the biggest. Well, it's the same thing with your flesh. If I'm watching TikTok and I'm not reading the Bible, I'm watching, YouTube, and Beyonce had the little video. We gonna da-da-da-da. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everybody got to, and I'm doing this versus in this word, guarding my eyes and my eye gates and my ear gates. What you think I'm gonna get caught up on? You know what I'm saying? And that's usually what happens. Then I'm watching TikTok. I'm not reading the word. Should I really get surprised when I get a call by that person that I haven't seen and talked to in X number of months at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock? That's the enemy. He knows, man, come on, I got him where I want him now.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to constantly, mercy and grace are available. But we also have a responsibility to put ourselves in a position where that becomes less and less a requirement. He says, resist the devil and he will flee. Mm-hmm. You got to resist him. You got to take on this authority I've given you. You've got to use that power. You've got to put the full armor of God on. I'm not going to dress you. I've already it's available. Access it by faith. And that's the revelation. Those are things I had to learn, and I've learned these things just maybe over the last 4 or 5 years. You know what I'm saying? To say, okay, it ain't got to be this way. I ain't got to keep saying, Father, forgive me, as often as I always, used to say it.
Yeah.
Forgive me, but my mistakes, I'm now becoming a little bit, I see where this is going. I'm not going that route. So you become different. Your maturity level increases, prayerfully, where you kind of see some stuff and say, oh, okay, nah, that's flesh. I ain't doing that.
Mm-hmm. That's deep, man. Because I think about, like, I was once, when I was incarcerated, I kept thinking about, like, I'm doing this in here. You know what I'm saying? Like, but when I get out, it's going to be a challenge. You know what I'm saying? And mind you, I spoke a lot of this out of fear, because I didn't know no other way than what I had lived since I was 13, 14. I stopped at 30. So it's like, but I still had 6 years to go. And at 6 years, it prepared me. You know what I'm saying? It walked me out to society in a more, whether I realized it or not, I was a lot more confident in what God could do for me. You know what I'm saying? With me and through me, than I did in the beginning. You know what I'm saying? When I was asking how I'm gonna live outside of this identity. But the one thing that I've seen constantly, especially now that I have a family, a wife and kids, is selfish intentional neglect. That's what it was like my acronym for sin.
Mm-hmm.
Like and it shows up either towards my wife, my kids, or myself. It's like I'm always trying to be the provider. So when I remember when I was first mentioning to you, you know what I'm saying, when we had our second daughter coming, my struggles, you know what I'm saying, weighing the contracts, weighing, the time with my family, and just weighing, still transitioning, you know what I'm saying, in my own mind, of just believing that I'm not an imposter, you know what I'm saying, that, I can run a business, that, people, will respect me regardless of what it is that they find out about my past, you know what I'm saying, but all of this stuff is going on inside of me, and in most cases, there were times where I wanted to tuck tail and run,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I'm saying, whether it was run to work and be busy, or run to, even for me, creating was an outlet, or running to working out, but it was hard for me to face it, you know what I'm saying, and I found myself not reading the word as much, you know what I'm saying, and then I would take the invite to come to, you know what I'm saying, the men's groups that you actually, would make available, you know what I'm saying, for men, not just like me, but, men who wanted to dive into the Word of God, you know what I'm saying, but I've found that, you know what I'm saying, as I grow, that selfishness and pride, it just seems like they're going to be around for a while, you know what I'm saying, and I'm growing deeper in my relationship with understanding how the two in my flesh communicate, you know what I'm saying, and how they try to direct and lead, me as a spirit man.
Sure.
And then I'm watching, my wife is pregnant again, so we have a family of 6 now, and as the lead spirit man, it's like the bad habits that I create, as you mentioned, towards the beginning of this, the bad ideas, the bad habits, the bad attitudes, like a lot of the bad, man, they taking and eating it up. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
The bad decisions, they taking and eating it up, and it can be, it could push you around a bit. You know what I'm saying? But reading the Bible and praying, they have been, they have been the anchoring, they have been the anchor. You know what I'm saying, and helping me to just keep my footing, stay still, not really entertain those ideas of, being an imposter. But that's pretty much why I asked you that, because it's, those two things, they continue, you know what I'm saying, to like rise up, man, and it's like I got to catch phase with them every day.
Well, and it goes back to, sin itself will be with us until the Lord returns.
Mm-hmm.
So pride, self-centered ambitions, whatever that stuff may be, that's all there, and that's not going nowhere. But He told us, "Greater is He that's in me than he that's in the world."
Right.
So even though those,
Sorry about that.
not a problem. Even though those things exist, the one who's in us is greater than that. So the challenge that most of us make, especially early in that process, is thinking that we've got to put on this, or we've got to take on this. No, He said, even when He told, what was it? I think it was the children of Israel, when we talked about going into the promised land. He said, "Here's the land I provided for you." And they was nervous. He said, "Surely I'll be with you." You know what I'm saying? So you were not expected by him to go do this by yourself. But the thing is that it's almost like talking to my son at 5 years old. We interpret that as we've got to go do it. No, this is a joint venture. You can't do this without me. You feel me? Mm-hmm. And so that process is where sometimes we miss it because we thinking, okay, I'm a man, I got to go out and make this happen. I got to provide for my family. Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And last time I checked, nothing meant nothing.
Nothing.
Provide for your family, have the time and energy to love your wife and your kids. You can do nothing apart from me. But just like that air mask coming down in that plane that's depressurizing, you better put the mask on yourself first before you put it on the child. Because if you put it on the child without putting it in yourself, you're going to have the kid trying to help lift you up. Feel me? And so we tend to get the priorities messed up. And again, going back to my own life, yeah, I'm doing, I was in a situation where, I don't feel loved. I don't feel certain. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we got a house, we got cars, what else you need? Well, maybe some time would be helpful. You know what I'm saying? Right. You work 6 to 2, I work 2 to 10. We doing this. Well, I'm thinking, especially when I read, you read 1 Corinthians 13, they say this is the love chapter. Well, you read what real love is like, that's only able to do with him.
Right.
You can't do that outside of him.
Right.
So,
and that's real talk.
And most folks trying to do that without him.
Right.
Which is impossible. Mm-hmm. You feel me? And so those are the kind of things where I think sometimes, well, most of the time, we get it messed up because we're taught by society or by the world, and even in churches that are not affiliated with the word, how you're supposed to go about this. And that's the thing, man, that when we get together, whether it's a Thursday night or if we just breaking bread at a Panera Bread, I try to share with brothers what I've learned. And that one of the major impactful things that I've learned is that, hey, man, I can't do none of this, man, without him. And so if I want to be able to do it, I got to go to the source. I got to get to the foundation. And that's where it begins, because he said if when we humble ourselves, he will lift us up.
How'd you come to Christ?
Well, like I said, I grew up in the church, so I made a conscious decision to accept Christ as like a 9-year-old. But a conscious decision to accept and then a conscious decision to follow was two different things, you know what I'm saying? So at 9, I made that decision to accept Christ and make him my Lord and Savior, but it was pretty much compartmentalized. I get with you when I need you kind of thing. Then it wasn't until, like I said, going through personal crisis and my marriage and different stuff in my life that made me say, hey, what does this better person look like? Because that's the only way I can see myself being a better person is through you. I had a Machiavellian kind of mindset. Machiavelli was written, I was a philosophy major in college, so Machiavelli, The Prince was the actual book. And in that book, the whole philosophy was it was better to be feared than to be loved. And that was real to me. I don't care nothing about nobody loving me. Mm-hmm. You're just going to respect me and you're going to be careful of me. You dig? And so that ain't Christ-like. Right. You know what I'm saying? And so learning to, not conform to the ways of thinking, but like the Bible says, transform my way of thinking. And again, this didn't happen overnight. I'm talking about a 17 to 20 year journey and still growing and learning different stuff and getting revelation stuff. And so it's an ongoing process. But I think, again, when we are willing to be transparent, like you said, hey, I don't understand this, I don't know this, this is unventured waters or unnavigated waters for me. Help me. He says, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open. He's faithful, and that's his character, so I open myself up to that.
And then that's 9. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, you went into...
I got Christian. I was a Christian. I accepted Christ as 9. But then again, like I said, I was a 16-year-old dude trying to tell women to come to my house
Right.
when my parents was at church. You know what I'm saying? So we went through all that. You know what I'm saying? But I've accepted Christ as a 9-year-old, but then getting the revelation of the relationship
Right.
happened, like I said, maybe, well, I'm almost 60 now, so probably about 20-something plus years. And that was just, again, going back to my father saying, hey, boy, I can't always be there for you. I ain't going to always be there for you. Not that I don't love you. Just, you know, you got to do this. You got to grow up. You know what I'm saying? And then being in a situation where even people with good intentions will let you down. Who can you depend on? Well, he said, you can depend on me. So I took him up on that. You know what I'm saying? And he's faithful. And even in situations where I may not have been able to see it, there's always been good that's come out of it. You know what I'm saying? And again, one of the things he's taught me, you know, and this is kind of, I don't know, it's not about me. But yet, and again, I said being a people pleaser, trying to look at, you know, my identity coming from other folks, I only respond to an audience of one, and that's him. Mm-hmm. So even from the standpoint, like what you said earlier, you know, want to kind of maybe tuck tail and run because other people may discover this about you, or you know, he already knows about you. So if he's for you, who could be against you?
Yeah.
You dig what I'm saying? And we know this, but it's a little different from knowing it to actually taking it and receiving it by faith and running with it. And that's the transition. That's the part of it that's been the most beneficial. Because I've known a lot of this stuff for a long time. But then being able to say, hey, like I said earlier about the difference between wisdom and knowledge is actually applying what you know. Now we applying it. And from that knowledge, that not the wisdom, we're getting revelation, which is even the deep roots on it. And that's key.
What has been, as you get older, what has been like what has been the what challenges you more these days versus 20 years ago when you begin to kind of line yourself, you know, some people say returning, you know what I'm saying, since like your returning moment to where you know, lined up and was like, okay, you know, it's full press, you know what I'm saying, like what have you seen either increase in challenge or would just say has become even more of a challenge recently that you are just like?
When you say challenge, because I know I said I was almost 60, and then now you jumped up with an age question, but I noticed that. I noticed that. So I'm gonna wonder about that. But you said challenge, because see, for me, man, to be honest with you, a lot of stuff that used to affect me don't affect me no more.
Right. And so I guess, I mean, and that's why I mention that because, you know, they say, if you find yourself in a fire, metaphorically speaking, you find yourself in the midst of temptation, or you find yourself like you're doing something right, the enemy on you. You know, so I'm just saying, at this point, man, you lead a lot of men.
Sure. God
is using you to empower men and women.
Sure.
He has you in a strategic position in the midst of a big ministry. So I know that I can't believe the enemy ain't leaving you alone. You know what I'm saying? There are some things that he probably, you know, that could be new challenges. Challenge is probably the wrong word. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, maybe adversity wise. But I'm just saying, like, as an individual that's growing, I'll be 42 this year. I'm just
kind of getting old too.
And I feel it. You know what I'm saying? But I know, like you know, Moses pretty much encouraged as a result of what the word said to the Israelites, like, don't depend on this manna today. You know what I'm saying? Tomorrow, like, you go out and get what's going to be available. I have faith to know it's going to be there. And so I think, you know, believing that the same thing that got me through a certain level of pride and selfishness in one season, you know, ain't necessarily going to be depended on to get through, you know, another season if it come up. If pride and weakness, you know, or selfishness is even an issue for you today like it once was.
Sure, and I like what you said, because that analogy right there, you know, being able to go back to what you used previously to get you out of something that seems like it's similar. Well, there's a part in the Bible where, in fact, brothers was talking about this last Thursday, where God told Moses when the children of Israel didn't have any water, he said, strike the rock, and from the rock the water would come. And then the second time, God said, speak to the rock. Okay, now the same situation, we ain't got no water, but he said, speak to the rock. Okay, and what did Moses? Moses went back to what worked last time. He got to hitting the rock. But that ain't what I told you to do. And see, I think sometimes we miss out on what is the word from God on that situation. Yeah, I know what you've done and what I've done and how I've done it in the past. But even when you look at Jesus' earthly ministry in terms of, let's just say, healing, he healed people in different ways. But he always said, according to your faith, you was healed. So we've got to have faith in God, understanding that his methodology may be a whole different way, but your dependence is still not changed. It's your dependence on him that doesn't change. Your faith in him doesn't change, but the methodology of the way it's actually achieved may change. Mm-hmm. And so he gives us discernment to be able to recognize, the challenges of the enemy. But we still have to make a choice to go the way he'd have us to go. In fact, the Bible says clearly, flee from temptation. He didn't say put yourself in it and dance around and see how long you can last before you get burned. Flee from it. Mm-hmm. So if he says flee and I stay, that's pride. You know what I'm saying? So we got to be conscious enough to realize just minute things like that. Back in the day, like I said, I would think, well, okay, I can do all things, so I can mess around with this and not cause no issue or not have no fallout from it. That's not how this works. He's put up these parameters. He's given us this guidance and direction for us to apply it, not to ignore it, not to try to do it our way, to do it the way he's already put it out.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so I've actually, again, I thank and I praise God for, the Holy Spirit just kind of talking to me and being quiet enough to say, okay, what's really going on here? I know what it looks like, but what's really happening? And then not getting caught up. And this is, again, goes back to, I listen. And oftentimes when people use I repetitively, it kind of shows a pecking order. Not to say that, you particularly or any of that. But even when I catch myself, if I'm always saying I, then where is he? Because there's no he in the I, you know what I'm saying? I put myself in a position almost of idolatry. It's about me. What people think about me, how people respond to me. And so, like I said earlier, he taught me 7-8 years ago, it ain't about me. And so, whatever role I may be called to, I go into it after spending time with him to see, getting the confirmation either through his word or somebody else may be saying, hey man, I heard this, or you might, whatever, confirmation that makes me or enables me to say, okay, let me go ahead and look at this. I would have never even, thought about this platform. You know what I'm saying? But I see it. But here's another thing I want to share with you. Because even if you said you brought somebody on this platform and they may challenge everything you believe, again, it's the guy. Are you looking at it as a challenge to you or a challenge to him? Because he can handle the challenge. You know what I'm saying? God. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. He can handle the challenge. Yeah. So, can you handle it? Will you go left because he's been challenged, or will you draw closer and get nearer to be fortified for the challenge? Amen. You feel me? Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things he showed me was that, in fact, the Bible says it because people have gone. I think it's Romans. It might be Hebrews, but it talks about people not seeing what they thought they should see, and so therefore they don't believe God. Does not nullify the effectiveness and faithfulness of God. I think it's Romans now that I think about Romans 3. And so being able to say people's experiences have no true impact on my relationship because they don't really, I don't know what they were doing behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
You dig what I'm saying? And I go into these situations with that in mind. What would you have me do, Father? If it's you, you always, when he gives you a vision, he always provides the corresponding provision. So if you want me to be there, if you want me to do it, it's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? Even today, I know where this place is at, but I put the little thing in my little GPS. And man, I kept going back to this. I'm like, man, this ain't the place. You know what I'm saying? But I know I'm supposed to be here. And I know, yeah, you know, they maybe don't want me here at the same time or the time I'm supposed to be, but I'm coming today. I got authority over this. You know what I'm saying? And so it was just those kinds of processing of thought and discernment, that's probably a better word, that enables, or what I've learned, or we've learned, to say, hey, you know, being submitted to him is always going to be the best option, even when it may not feel like it, even when it may not seem like it from a sense realm perspective.
Yeah.
It's always going to be the best way, because he's got a perspective of eternity that I can't even imagine.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, and he sees the beginning from the end from the beginning. I don't see nothing like, all I can do is, and all he's asked me is to do what I've asked you to do now. Because remember, faith is now. Faith ain't yesterday or tomorrow. It's now. So just do what he asked me to do today, right now. That's all we got to do. That's all any of us have been asked to do. And when we do that, we take the pressure off ourselves, because we want to figure out the other stuff. He ain't asked you for all that. Like he said, speak to the rock.
Don't hit it.
Don't hit it.
He don't even say don't hit it.
It just says speak.
He just says speak.
So you're supposed to just be obedient to that, because remember, obedience is better than sacrifice.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So all those kind of things. And again, I'm not talking about something that was just added to the Bible. That was in there for 2,000 years or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And so all we've got to do is access it, use it,
Right.
apply it. Take some time out between, instead of doing other stuff that we think is priority. Look at that. Focusing on that. And we'll find, you get so much out of it that you can, like the little detour for the 78, since it's been going through its little issues. You find, man, there's all kind of ways that you can, man, I don't even need the 78 no more, bro. I can find all kind of ways to detour this thing. And it's the same thing with these other obstacles in life. He's actually provided detours around that. It's not our job to, he didn't expect you to, he didn't want you to go in there to kind of see what's going on. No, that was your mistake. But now that you're in there, let me show you how to get up out of there.
Right.
My own life, like I said, boom, I done been through all kind of stuff. Was that a divine plan? No, I mean, I've learned from it. He's made me who I am. But had I been obedient and listened to what he said, I could have avoided most of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If that answers you.
No, that does, man. And like, I kind of stumbled because I was thinking as I was asking the question, like, that was echoing in my heart. It's like, obedience is better than sacrifice.
Sure.
And it's like, that has been a theme in my life. I feel like I'm sacrificing the time I could be with my family to provide for my family. You know what I'm saying? But then also, just in life, period, like the comforts of being in that identity for so long, gangbanging and just that life, you know what I'm saying? Like, just being obedient to the reality of what I knew was, I knew I was being called out of and into, but I was sacrificing that identity or those feelings or that emotion. And just hearing you share from the beginning all the way up into that moment when I felt led to ask that question, I was thinking more along the lines of a lot of us who battle with the reality of, obedience and sacrifice without even realizing it or knowing it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And most of us that have an opportunity to be used by or to be available for God to use us, I know I do. I struggle at times with being obedient with what I know I feel led to do based off of what I feel I got to give up in order to do it. You know what I'm saying? And so,
but when you look at that,
And I'm just being transparent.
No. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And there needs to be more opportunities, and brothers need to be more transparent like that, because it's not until you are honest with yourself can you be honest with somebody else. And so the transparency is a beautiful thing. But what I was going to say is, going back to that root situation, the only reason we feel that, for me to not, and I'm just using this as an example, for me to not take the contract and go work and get this money at the sacrifice of my family, is because somewhere inside you don't think God can make up the difference. You dig what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You figure, or we figure, we've got to go out and make this happen for this to happen. Well, that's why he told the children of Israel, just take enough manna for you today. You ain't got to take next week's manna. Just take today's manna. And on Saturday, take 2 days worth. You feel me? Because I got you. But even in those situations, you had people hoarding the manna. Yeah. Even though they've been 4 days in a row seeing this out there the next day, even though, you know what I'm saying? But they looked at their own manna and they had worms in it. It had gone bad anyway. Even though you collected it, still went bad. Feel me? And the fresh manna is out there tomorrow. So that's why trust in the Lord, Proverbs 3:6, 5:6.
All your heart.
Yeah. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Now again, people mess with these absolutes, but last time all mean all, bro. All your heart, lean not into your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he's going to do what? Direct your path. But if you don't do that, then how can he direct your path? Mm-hmm. But we want to direct our own path and hopefully ask him to bless it, the path we took, versus doing it the way he said it, and just trust him, even if it may take some time to do it. He may not give you an instant revelation of what he wants you to do, mm-hmm. but you trusted him enough to give him that time. Then by faith, okay, I'm going to step out like this, but I'm basing my faith on this peace that you've given me about this choice. Gotcha. Not just walking out there. You feel me? Because even if Peter walking on the water, if it be you, Jesus, bid me come. Now we talking about water. He says, come. Peter gets out the boat. Now, Peter wasn't the only one in the boat, but Peter was the only one who said, bid me come. And so it was Peter's faith that enabled him to walk on the water. But then the Bible says he looked at some other stuff, and then what happened? He began to sink. And the question that I had this last week, it was like, Spirit said, well, why didn't Jesus sink? How did Jesus walk on the water? What was Jesus doing? How did Jesus walk on the water? Well, Jesus was using his faith to walk on the water too. And some people miss that. Yeah. Because if it was about faith, if it was about consistent faith, Peter would have still been walking, just like Jesus was walking. In fact, Jesus used his faith to save Peter from sinking. So faith wasn't the issue. It was his lack of faith or allowing his circumstances to contaminate his faith, right, and create unbelief or doubt that enabled him to sink. That's why he said, oh, you of little faith. He didn't say he didn't have no faith, because he was actually walking on water. But it was little faith. So whether it's where we don't know where that point was, where his faith deteriorated, but it was there. And it's the same thing with us. If you start out trusting God, believing God, but then I got this now is the attitude, we asking for trouble. We asking for trouble. And that's the thing, I think, where the renewing of our mind definitely comes in, because you've got to consciously say, okay, Father, what would you have me do today? How you have me to do this? What you want me to do? But you got to go to him to do that. You got to get in his word to do that. You spend time in prayer, praying in tongues, whatever it may be. But you got to get that first. And then, okay. Because remember, he's outside of time.
Right.
And then you can say, okay, I got this. Okay, we got this. Now you're doing it. And you'll find he'll do more with what's projected in your day in the time period that you may, quote unquote, have left than you could have ever done if you'd had the whole day. Mm-hmm. That's why the tithe, people talk about tithing, that's 10%. Well, he can do more what you can do. He'll bless you where you can do more with that 90 or 80% or whatever is left than you could have ever done with the 100%.
Right.
It's the same thing with the time, your actual time, chronologically as well as your monetary time or whatever it may be. It's the same thing, no different.
Well, sir, this has been a journey. I appreciate you coming through, man.
Man, it's been a pleasure.
I
for
know
me.
it was short notice, but I'm glad that you was able to accommodate, you know what I'm saying, like, you know, the platform and just the opportunity to sit with me, you know what I'm saying. I mean, I know the opportunity is always there, you know what I'm saying. Like, I got your number, you got my number. Man, we actually probably need to do a topical study on this thing, man.
Dude, hey, son,
you through,
man,
and just, you know, like, do a topical study on something, you know what I'm saying, because I know this platform can be so much more than what I'm thinking, and so we'll just let God have His way with it.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. I want to encourage you to continue to do whatever He calls you to do. Recognize, like I said, when He's gonna give you a vision, He's gonna get the corresponding provision. And you know, I've been blessed, man, just to sit here and participate in this. And I remember the first day I met you. You know, we was at Starbucks with Jimmy. You know, and so, you know, not having any past history with you at all, and to see, you know, the fruition of what this has become, to me, blesses me deeply. And I got, you know, I'm proud, bro. I'm excited for you, man. Excited for your future. And only thing I would say is, like I said, throughout this conversation, take the pressure off you. You dig what I'm saying? It ain't about you. Yeah, you've been through some stuff, but and this was David was considered a man after God's own heart, and we know what he's done.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Abraham was considered a father of faith. He was scared, didn't even people know his wife, was his wife. Sarah was his wife. You know what I'm saying? So Gideon was a mighty man of valor when he was actually hiding from, you know, from Midianites. You know what I'm saying? So it's not who the world sees us to be. It's who He's created us to be.
Mm-hmm.
You dig what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that was done way before you even got here, bro. And just identifying that as the center, and not what happened back there. And sure, that had a place to play, that had a role to play. You probably wouldn't be this version of who you are without some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But just like that could have been, like we talked about earlier, that can be used positive. You got some brothers who brought that baggage around that's continue to be a negative.
Yeah.
So even that requires us to make certain day-to-day choices. But, God's plan is so much bigger than all of that, man. And we just got to seek Him for it and